Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Kansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty Annual Meeting and Abolition Conference. For those of you who I have not met, I am Donna Schneeweiss. I am the board chair, and it is our pleasure to thank you for joining us today for this virtual event. The format of the day is that we will very briefly do our coalition annual meeting, which is a short business meeting, and then we will immediately move into the abolition conference. The Kansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty has one singular purpose, and that is the abolition of the death penalty. We are politically, religiously, and geographically diverse. Our members have moral and practical reasons for opposing the death penalty and wanting it replaced. So those of you who are coalition members who are here today, thank you. Thank you for your support of the coalition and the work that you are doing to help bring about abolition in Kansas. One of the components of the annual meeting is our sharing with our members of the Kansas Coalition budget. Under the 2013 bylaws, the board sets the budget, but we want you to know what it costs to do this work. So I call upon Treasurer Robert Sanders to do the budget report.
Thank you, Donna. As far as our budget for FY 2022, we projected board gifts of $4,000 and individual gifts of $8,000 for a projected income of $12,000. As far as our expenses, our normal expenses, the phone, printing, postage, were based on actual expenses. Our programming expenses for our computer hosting and also the upkeep of our website. And so our total projected expenses were $8,300. So leaving us a net of an income of approximately $4,000.
Okay. If you have any questions about the budget, please enter those in the chat, and then we will be able to work on getting those questions answered later in the question and answer period. So thank you, Robert, for that report and the wonderful work you do as treasurer. The one formal action item on the annual meeting agenda is the election of new officers and board members. Board terms, full terms, are 2 years. And so each year, half of the officers and half of the board members are up for consideration. Robert served as our chair of the nomination committee, and so he is going to give us the report of the nomination committee. And I believe we have a slide coming up with the nominees as well, so that you will be able to see them as well.
Okay, thanks again, Donna. First of all, I'd like to thank the nominating committee for their hard work on getting the slate of officers together. The nominating committee consisted of Merle Carver-Arman, Mary Head, Jeffrey Dazzy, and Mary Sloan, and myself, of course, as chair. The slate of officers for this year, nominees are Chair Donna Schneeweiss, Secretary Merle Carver-Arman, and then our board class for this year consists of Sister Therese Banger, Hope Blelick Reynolds, Diane Garlick, Mike Poach, Chris Plumley, Al Torr, and those are all 2-year terms. And then for unexpired 1-year term this year is Lacey Rourke and Marcus Rhodes. So that is our slate of officers that we're putting forth for consideration for our members this year.
Thank you, Robert, for that report of the nominating committee. They have given us a proposed slate of nominees, and I first need to ask whether any coalition members who are present today wish to make a nomination from the floor. If you wish to make a nomination from the floor, please do so via the chat. Okay, seeing none, We are now going to vote on the nominations. And again, this will be done via the chat, so get those keyboards ready. All in favor of the nominee slate, whoops, excuse me, I got ahead of myself. Let me ask for a motion to approve the nominee slate. Therese Banger so moves, and Chris Pompelli seconds. We now have a motion to approve the nominee slate. So all in favor of the nominee slate, please indicate by saying so in the chat using aye or yay. Anyone who is opposed to the nominee slate, please indicate no in the chat. Seeing none, we have an election of the proposed slate. My thanks to Robert and Merrill and Jeff and all of the other board members for their work. It is a very important work. And sometimes it just takes a little while, but it is very important. So I want to thank my board colleagues who are on the conference today for their work. And I want to acknowledge in particular as well, Sean, who is with us, and Thea Perry, who is not able to be with us. Sean and Thea have elected to end their service as board members for various reasons. We are very grateful for what they have given us as board members. And we are looking forward to Marcus and Lacey joining our board. So as we prepare to conclude the annual meeting, I just want to note that the work of the coalition is work that is done by all of us, whether we're board, whether ordinary coalition members, each one of us working together is what helps make us advance coalition abolition in Kansas. And so thank you all very much. And at this point, the annual meeting is concluded, and I am going to turn it over to Robert and the panelists. Take it, it's a fun day, to Ron and the panelists. Thank you, and I am going on mute.
Hello?
Ron, you're good. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, I have lost the picture for some reason. Thank you all for attending today. The conference theme is United Against the Death Penalty. All roads lead to appeal. What we'll do today in terms of format is each panelist will speak for about 5 minutes as to their reasons for supporting the death penalty or supporting abolition of the death penalty. And then we will have a conversation among the panelists about what has been shared. This will be followed by a time for questions from our registrants. If you have questions for any of our panelists or for the panel as a whole, please enter those in the chat function, and we will try to answer the questions as they come in. Let me introduce the panelists before we begin. Our first panelist is Mary Head. Mary is a native of Topeka who received her BA in elementary education from Kansas Wesleyan and her MA in curriculum and instruction from the University of Kansas. She's taught at all grade levels, including English in Japan for 8 years. Her last job was, before retirement, was teaching high school English for speakers of other languages in the Blue Valley School District. Mary knows firsthand the experience of losing a loved one to murder. Her sister, Patricia, was murdered in 1984. And despite there being a suspect, no one was ever held accountable for her sister's death. Mary has testified against the death penalty before the Kansas legislature and has lobbied legislators against the death penalty, and has spoken eloquently about how the loss of her sister has taught her what she feels and knows about the death penalty. Dalton Glasscock will follow Mary. Dalton is a lifelong resident of Sedgwick County. He has a bachelor's in business administration from Wichita State and a master's of arts in education and human development in, this is a mouthful, organizational leadership and learning from George Washington University. Dalton has worked as a field representative and constituent representative for one of Kansas members of our congressional delegation, and now works for a small business that spans multiple states. He was the youngest elected Republican Party chair when he served as Sedgwick County Party chair. He also served a short term as a Sedgwick County commissioner. Dalton was instrumental in leading the Kansas Federation of College Republicans to take a pro-death penalty abolition stance back in 2015. In other words, their policy was to oppose the death penalty, and that's largely thanks to Dalton's work. Dalton's also a former board member of the coalition. Our next panelist, Kevin Willmott, is a Junction City native. Kevin graduated from Marymount College of Kansas and later NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. He's now a professor of film and media studies at the University of Kansas. Kevin's also pretty well known, I think. Many of you will know him by name as a screenwriter, writer, and filmmaker. His works include 9th Street, which is about life in Junction City, Jayhawkers, which KU basketball fans will remember as focusing on Wilt Chamberlain and Fog Allen, and CSA, the Confederate States of America. The one most of us remember the best is his Oscar-winning movie work on Black Klansman with Spike Lee. His latest work, called The 24th, focuses on the Houston riot of 1917. Kevin's won an Academy Award and award from the British Academy of Film and Television Arts as well for his work. Reverend Willmar Harder is our fourth panelist. He is a Minnesota native who graduated from Bethel College in North Newton. Reverend Harder completed the seminary studies at the Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary. His ministerial service includes pastoring the Mennonite Church in Inman for 10 years. And then he spent 10 years with the Mennonite Central Committee for 4 years in Bolivia. Currently, he is the pastor at Buhler Mennonite Church in Buhler, Kansas. Our final panelist is Topeka native Julia Spainhour. Julia started her professional career as an instrumental music teacher, I understand, and I didn't know this before. She subsequently went to law school, graduated, and became a criminal defense lawyer. She's been a public defender here in Kansas now for over 20 years, and she presently serves as the chief attorney for the Capital Habeas Office in Topeka. Her current work daily confronts the challenges of the criminal justice system here in Kansas and nationally. How it works, how it does not work. Her office investigates death penalty cases and takes appropriate habeas corpus action or post-conviction action uh, regarding errors that may have happened in the legal process after the first mandatory appeal is completed. So let's go ahead and hear from each one of our panelists. Mary, tell us why you are opposed to the death penalty.
Thank you, Ron. Donna, Ron, members of the board, and all of those who are joining us on Zoom, thank you for the opportunity to share my story. As Ron said, my name's Mary Head, and I'm here to speak to you from the perspective of someone who's lost a loved one to murder. We grew up in Topeka, but my sister, Pat, or Patricia Erickson, had moved to Colorado and lived just outside the small town of Norwood. And it was a tiny place where everyone knew everyone and nobody ever locked their doors. Well, early on May 17th, 1984, a man entered Pat's house. And thankfully, this was after her daughter had left for school. And Pat was sleeping and he just walked in and shot her twice. Now, Pat's body was discovered by her 13-year-old daughter when she came home from school that day. Now, any adult would be traumatized by that experience, but the thought of this happening to a child is heartbreaking. So it wasn't surprising that Talina had to be sedated and was inconsolable for some time, especially at her funeral when all of the family was gathered in Topeka. I was working as a missionary in Japan, teaching English at the time. And remember, this was 1984, so it was pre-cell phone, pre-email, pre-internet, and so pre-instant communication. And my family had a really hard time contacting me. Well, they finally reached my boss, Father Mac, who broke the news to me about my sister's death, but nothing about how it had happened. And I was in total disbelief of this whole thing because I had just talked to her on an overseas call the day before. And in that call, she told me that she had finally broken up with her abusive boyfriend and gotten her own place, but that he was refusing to accept the breakup and insisted that he would get her back. I learned much later that she was likely so fearful for both herself and her daughter that she was making arrangements for her daughter to either live with a friend or move back to Kansas to live with her own dad. I just can't even imagine how frightened Pat was. Now, from the beginning of the investigation, the ex-boyfriend was the only suspect. In fact, from the police reports that I have only just recently gained access to, even his own brother told the police that he thought Lee had done it. Unfortunately, for the preliminary hearing, the regular judge was not available, so they brought in somebody from a neighboring county. And this judge ruled that there was insufficient evidence to hold Lee over for trial. So he was released, much to the shock of everyone, including Lee and his brother. And naturally, it shocked our family and left us feeling helpless and confused. In Pat's case, because there was never a trial, the death penalty was never on the table. In fact, while my thoughts and feelings were just like pinballs bouncing, I couldn't focus on anything. My thoughts never did light on the possibility of Pat's killer being executed. It just never occurred to me. When I thought about it, what I wanted was for him to be held accountable and for society and my niece in particular to be protected from his violence. Now, as an aside, more than 15 years after Pat's death, Talina told me that she still had fear of Lee showing up and killing her. Now, getting back to my story, when I could focus, what I wanted was to mourn my sister's passing and to comfort my sister and my mother, and for all of us to begin to heal. At the same time, we were also frightened and angry that no one was brought to justice for taking Pat's life and robbing a daughter of a mother and forever changing her life. One never gets over the murder of a loved one, but one must choose how to respond to it and move on in life. As I stated before, I wanted accountability and Talina's safety, but seeking the death penalty never crossed my mind. I have long been opposed to the death penalty on moral grounds, but I also have looked at it in practical terms. The more I've observed how the death penalty works in reality, the more I've become convinced that our system of capital punishment is broken and fails murder victims' families. And of course, the more cases I hear about of those falsely convicted and later exonerated, the more convinced I am that this form of punishment needs to end. I fear for an innocent person being executed. Now, I know my family's story is not unique. Each year, thousands of murders across the country go unsolved. Given that many cases like my sister's go unsolved, I have a hard time understanding why Kansas and other states dedicate time and resources to keeping the death penalty when they could be reallocated towards solving cold cases and providing much needed support to families. There have been over 3,000 murders in Kansas since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1994. In a handful of cases, prosecutors seek the death penalty, which means the extra time, money, and resources go into these cases, but for what purpose? Capital cases languish in the courts for the years, and some death sentences are overturned. I can only imagine how painful the years-long appeals process is for the families with the continual reopening of the wounds. My own experience in preparing this testimony and when I testified in Topeka brought back my own painful memories of Pat's funeral, as well as the visions of my niece's inconsolable weeping. Sorry, when I was preparing this, I didn't get all that emotional. Okay, so the thought of victims' families reliving those memories again and again throughout the appeals process is reason enough to put offenders in prison for life, thus providing the families with finality and the ability to move on with their lives. Kansas can do better than keeping in place its broken death penalty, given that our state has limited amount of resources for law enforcement and public safety. We need to use these resources wisely and not on a costly death penalty that fails to make our state safer. Kansas would be better served focusing its attention and resources on helping the families of murder victims and investigating other unsolved murders. Murder shakes families and the broader community, and it understandably challenges us on the issues such as the capital punishment. The murder of my sister deeply challenged my views on the subject, but I still reject the death penalty because I recognize it fails to help families and communities in the aftermath of tragedy. Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994, pours millions into the system with little results, and will do so for the foreseeable future. Kansas would be better served by following Colorado's example of abolishing the death penalty. Now, before they abolished it in, I believe it was 2020, they suspended the death penalty in 2013, and they wanted to redirect that money towards solving cold cases. So at that time, the sheriff of Montrose County, where my sister lived, made it known that he intended to reopen Pat's case. And the reporter who wrote about his plans and mentioned Lee as the only suspect was contacted by a member of Lee's family and was informed that after Pat's death, Lee had moved back to his home in New Jersey and at some point years later had committed suicide. So while our family did not have the satisfaction of seeing Pat's killer held accountable, the efforts of that sheriff in this case show that the reallocating of funds made possible by the suspension of the death penalty process went where it was supposed to and could help other families. I'd like to say in closing that we family members of murder victims have had the unfortunate experience of becoming members of a club that we joined involuntarily and would give anything to leave. Others may love and support us, but they will never truly know how we feel. Like it or not, we share a bond, yet each of us must come to his or her own decision on the question of the death penalty. I'm only speaking for myself and would not presume that all others share my views. That said, any disagreements we have cannot diminish the respect and sympathy I feel for those who have suffered a similar loss. Thank you. I think you're muted, Ron.
Remember any questions you might have. Thanks, Mary. And we'll have questions later. Dalton, why are you opposed to the death penalty?
Well, Mary, thank you for sharing your story. I think that was the first time I heard it in complete detail. So thank you for sharing your story. Mine is kind of a culture and a heart change that I had when I was being active in GOP politics. And so growing up, I was very involved in politics starting at 15 and just came to the conclusion of supporting the death penalty because that's what my family's beliefs were. That's what everybody around me in the party's beliefs were. And grew up in a conservative evangelical household whose beliefs were surrounded by that, growing up in rural Sedgwick County. And so for me, I really came at abolition because of two friends that were willing to have conversations with me with truth and also grace. And it is because of the work of this coalition that I can directly trace back to my heart change on this issue. And so two individuals, Chase Blasey and Jennifer Basinger, both were previous board members of this coalition, would randomly have conversations with me. And this wasn't an issue that I was incredibly passionate about, but for some reason they knew that this was something that was needed for me to have a conversation about. And so Jennifer and Chase would independently begin to push me on this issue. And so I began to pray about this, to consider it. And really, it was during my time in college that I began to change my views on the death penalty and support abolition because of their work and because of their involvement in this coalition. You know, for me, as a conservative and as a Republican, I believe that the death penalty is incompatible with a culture of life. It's costly and it's unnecessary. And so I think being opposed to the death penalty fits in alignment of my conservative beliefs and my Republican values as well. And so as a conservative, I believe in protecting systems and institutions that are benefiting people. But when those systems and institutions begin not benefiting people, it's our right to reform or to abolish those systems. And for me, the main issue and why I got involved in politics was the issue of life. And as a Christian and as a conservative, I believe that life should be protected from conception to natural death. And prior to my time, and many of my colleagues in Republican circles still will say from conception to natural death, but support the death penalty. And so that's a conversation that, especially reaching out to young people and reaching out to people that have been jaded by politics of today, people are looking for consistency on issues. And I think when you have to offer a caveat of, well, I'm pro-life, except when it comes to the death penalty, or I'm blank, except, you begin to lose credibility and you begin to lose the ability to enact change on certain policies as well. And so for me, I know that 185 people have been exonerated since the 1970s across the country. And even the risk of one innocent life is not worth the death penalty. And also to me, even the risk of putting a guilty person to death is not it for me as well. That life is precious, regardless of what decisions people made to get there. So for me, life is the paramount reason that I'm opposed to the death penalty. Second to that is protecting our resources as a state. It costs millions and millions more to put somebody to death than to put them on life without parole. In California, for example, they did a study that it was 20 times more expensive. And as conservative, I believe conserving our resources. And Mary, spoke about this beautifully, in that those resources to be allocated towards actually solving crimes and making sure that dangerous individuals are put behind bars for the rest of their life. And using our resources better as a state and as a nation, I think is very important. As a Republican, I have a healthy distrust of the government as well. And so the belief that we would give the government one of the most powerful abilities to kill its own citizens and do it in our name, I think is something that is incompatible with conservative beliefs as well. And so the past few years in particular, we've seen a tremendous movement from Republicans and conservatives on the issue of abolition. I know this was, I think, mentioned in my intro, but the Kansas Federation of College Republicans unanimously opposed the death penalty in 2013, 2014, 2015. I don't think they voted on it since then, but in each one of those years, they passed resolutions opposing it. And alongside Jennifer Basinger, Chase Blasey, and a few other Republicans at the state GOP meeting, we were able to withdraw or remove support, GOP support for the death penalty from the Kansas platform, the Republican platform. And so it doesn't offer a opposition to the death penalty, but the Kansas GOP platform has a neutral stance on the death penalty because of the work that we've done on this issue. And I think that is, you're seeing people from all four corners of the state that are supporting abolition. In addition, you have people on the national stage that are supporting abolition, and you have people that are on both sides of kind of the Republican spectrum. You have more libertarian minds like Rand Paul and Ron Paul that are opposed to the death penalty, usually for fiscal reasons, but also for inherent power of government reasons. And then on the other side of that, you have more social conservatives like Rick Santorum that are also supporting abolition of the death penalty. And so I believe that this is an issue that we can find bipartisan support here in Kansas and across the nation on abolition. And I know that the work of this group has been instrumental in my beliefs. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation today, looking forward to your questions and being engaged in abolition as we move forward to the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you, Dalton. Now let's hear from Kevin and a different perspective.
Thanks so much, Ron. I guess I come from my point of view of being against the death penalty, obviously for moral reasons, but others have talked about that. But so I think I'll talk about kind of more of a political approach to my opposition. I think America has always wanted to be a multiracial democracy. And it wasn't really established as that because obviously when the country was established, my ancestors were slaves. And we were not considered a full human beings, even within the Constitution. So we've been on this road to try to become inclusive and a truly multiracial democracy. We still have a long ways to go. And we are literally kind of having that battle. And I would call it a battle right now over that in the country. And I wanted to say to Mary, thank you so much for your sharing your story, because I think that whenever you talk about this issue, you have to acknowledge the emotional kind of realities that come along with it and go along with it. And thank you for your willingness to share your personal story. And I think it connects to that emotional part of this issue, connects to what my approach to being against it. And I think that when you desire to have something like a multiracial democracy, which is what we have in America, whether we like it or not, I think some people don't really, well, there's the fight that's going on over that right now. And some people are more inclined to support that. Other people are kind of really, I think, against it. But within that fight, within that desire that the country kind of has, is a lot of emotion. It's a great deal of emotion. And And so for African Americans and for the poor and for people of color, the legacy of that march toward a multiracial democracy has been lined with tremendous injustice all through our history. You know, African Americans, the poor, you know, Mexican Americans, Jewish Americans, Asian Americans. You know, our story has just been one of tremendous injustice in this country. And we have to admit that, and we have to learn from it, and we have to know it to kind of understand what someone like Mary has to go through as a survivor. And I think when I hear politicians that don't acknowledge that emotional part of the story, I think that's a real mistake, because it's just the very nature of it. And so I think because this thing that America wants to be, it by its very nature, it is, the death penalty does not fit within it, cannot function within that idea. Because within the very nature of having a multiracial democracy, which kind of really means more than anything, it means accepting people for all their different faiths, accepting people for all their different situations, all their different walks of life, their sexual, their sexual identity, every aspect of who they are is ultimately part of that democracy. And so to then come and make such a hard judgment as life or death it does not fit within the very nature of what we're trying to achieve in the country. It just doesn't fit. You know, as Gandhi said, an eye for an eye leaves the world blind. And that is the problem with it. And I want to talk about it historically a little bit. And you know, as someone who's a filmmaker and has, you know, grown up, media is a big part of, you know, who I am growing up. You know, people of my generation, you'll remember they used to have a TV show called Perry Mason on. And Perry Mason was this great lawyer who at the end of every episode won the case. And the bad guys went to jail and the good guys went home free. And so we all grew up kind of looking at America like, oh, hey, this is great. You know, you get a good lawyer like Perry Mason, and you know, you've been framed for a crime you didn't commit. You're not gonna be punished for that. You're gonna clearly be exonerated, and you get to go home. And and literally the bad guy is gonna get caught in the courtroom, and he's gonna go to jail. Not so much in real life, not so much. But that's how we grew up thinking American justice worked. So now we have a lot of folks in the country who, when you talk about the complicated aspect of American justice, and American justice is very, very, very complicated, historically and today. When you start talking about American justice, the realities of American justice, it becomes a very, very complicated story. Nothing like Perry Mason, okay? And I think we still want to hold on to that as if that's somehow the reality of it. And then when you hear someone like Mary tell her story of loss, you see how justice really works in the country. And it's not nearly that cut and dry, black and white, life or death. I want to share a historical story with you real quick that I think most people don't know about this story. It's a true story. It's of George Stinney Jr., who was put to death in 1944 in South Carolina. He was 14 years old. I just want to read a couple of things from an article about it. So George, 14-year-old boy, if you Google him, you'll see he's a child. He's a 14-year-old child. He was executed in South Carolina in 1944. He was kept from his parents and any legal counsel when he was interrogated by the authorities. And his supporters claimed that the small, frail boy was so scared that he would have said whatever he thought would make the police happy, despite there having been no physical evidence linking him to the death of 2 girls. Stenny Jr. had been arrested and executed within the space of around 3 months. From the time he was arrested to the time he was executed was about 3 months. Executioners noted that he was too small for the electric chair when he died. The straps did not fit him, an electrode was too big for his leg, and the boy had to sit on a Bible to fit properly in the chair. This is a small Black boy, 14 years old, accused of committing a crime. 70 years later, in 2014, he was exonerated finally. You never see headlines in the United States. Super rich guy, exonerated, spends 20 years in prison and finally released for a crime he didn't commit. You don't see that headline. I've never seen that headline. Multi-millionaire serves 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. I've never seen that headline. Black people, brown people, red people, yellow people, poor white people, that's who go to jail. That's who often go to jail for crimes they didn't commit. And that's often who die in the electric chair or by hanging or all the ways we do it in this country still, or lethal execution, lethal injection for crimes they didn't commit. And that's, for me, that's kind of the reality of it. I think that as Mary's witness kind of laid out, you have to acknowledge the pain and suffering that victims of people have with that, with the suffering that goes along when you lose someone. I fortunately have not had to have someone in my family lose someone like that, but I have had friends that have been murdered by others. And to me, I've tried to always believe the notion that executing them would not bring my friend back. And so justice is a much more important part of the resolution to a horrible part of American and human life than to take another life in the process. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Kevin. A lot of food for thought there. Pastor Harder, your thoughts?
Sure. First of all, thank you to the panel for sharing your stories, and quite moving. We aren't good enough to kill people. That's what the Sunday school superintendent at the church where I served told me. And those words kept on running through my head, especially as I prepared for today. We aren't good enough to kill people. From young on in my home and in our community of faith, Minnesota was Mennonite, I was taught that all people are created good by their creator, by God. And even though Martin Luther wasn't a Mennonite, he once stated, God doesn't love us because of our worth, what we've done or what we've accomplished. Rather, we are of worth because God loves us. And that was what I was taught and what I believe, and I still believe. God loves all of us, and it was rooted in our interpretation of Scripture. And it horrifies me to hear that story of George Stanek Jr., Kevin, of having to sit on a Bible to be executed. It goes beyond my understanding of Scripture. But central to our understanding of Scripture was our understanding of God and what God did for us, that God proves, as it says in Romans, or demonstrates his love to us, that while we were still his enemies, or sinners is the word often used as well, but enemies, Christ died for us, and that death was a death sentence passed on an innocent person. But the point is that God didn't wait to prove anything or have us prove anything. It was unconditional. God loves all people no matter what. And this faith and this resulting ethic from a excuse me, from a group of people who were executed for their faith, Anabaptists and Mennonites, during and after the Reformation, and we would claim innocently, are rooted in that Holy Scripture. Passages were taught to me like the teaching of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, and we were taught that if Jesus said it, he meant it, and he meant it for all of us. And he says stuff like, "You've heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, don't resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer also the other. You've heard the law that says love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven." Furthermore, we were taught, we were lifted up the example of Apostle Paul in Romans. "Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scripture says, I will take revenge, I will pay back, says the Lord. Instead, you are to, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing so, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Do not let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good." So those were sort of the scriptures that shaped me in this and are central in reading the rest of the text and are central for establishing, I guess, any sort of ethic. And of course, there are many deep and hard questions that need to be asked of those texts. But finally, there's the text where Jesus is involved in a life situation where he drives home, I think, the point that I think that my church Sunday school superintendent was making when he said, we are not good enough to kill people. It's recorded that Jesus came across a situation where a woman was about to be executed for being, quote, caught in the act of adultery. What happened to the man? I don't know, but the woman was caught. And Jesus steps in, and the religious leaders, who also have a bit of civic power, challenge Jesus with the point that, hey man, our law dictates that a person caught in adultery should be given the death penalty, law and order. It's the law. And it's true, what they quote. But Jesus changes the trajectory of self-righteousness and that law, and he says, all right, but let the one who has never sinned, let the one who is good enough, throw the first stone. And when the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. To me, Jesus Christ, and I'm a Christian pastor, and so that's central to me, is telling us that we are not good enough to kill people. But then my church's Sunday school superintendent told me another thing about why we're not good enough to kill people. And my church's Sunday school superintendent knows something about the law, not just biblical law, American law as well. You might know him. His name is Judge Stephen Becker. And he was a representative as well for a while from the Reno County area. Our criminal justice system is not good enough to execute anyone. And when a judge says that, my ears perk up. Since 1973, and this has been referred to, 186 former death row prisoners have been exonerated of all charges related to the wrongful convictions that put them on death row. So what if we had killed them? Furthermore, Judge Becker underscores the point when he asks this haunting question. It's haunting for me, at least. He often asks this question: how can we impose the absolute certainty of death when we do not require the absolute certainty of guilt in our judicial system? If a defense attorney would say, this is how I understand it, I'm just a preacher though. If a defense attorney would say to the jury, before you convict this person of murder and thereby death, you must be absolutely certain of his guilt. A good prosecutor could or should object. Objection, Your Honor. Certainty is not required to convict. And by law, the judge would have to grant the objection. So how can we impose the absolute certainty of death when we do not require the absolute certainty of guilt. Because I am not good enough to kill people. We are not good enough to kill people. And you know, the caption of a criminal case reads, "The state of Kansas versus," and you can put whoever's bad person's name in there. You and I are the plaintiffs. And I don't want executions carried out in my name because I am not good enough to kill people. We are not good enough to kill people.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's good to hear. And Judge Becker has said some of the same things to me many times too. So we do appreciate him maybe as much as you do. Julia, you fight these things on a street level every day. Why?
Why? Well, I do it because I believe we aren't good enough to kill people, and our system is so flawed that we cannot trust it to make the choice of those who live and those who die. My belief in those statements is a long-held belief, but I can tell you when I began law school and I began my career as a criminal defense attorney, I believed that the system could work and that I could be an equal player in that system, and I could have an effect on the result by digging in, by locating the truth, by finding the truth, by exposing lies, people who would lie for a benefit, people who would lie to please a prosecutor or for whatever reason. I believed I could help bring that truth to light and affect outcomes. And sometimes I could, but many, many times I couldn't. There were many, many times where the truth did not become known. Innocent people were convicted of crimes they didn't do. And although I persisted in my field and I persisted in criminal defense, that experience and those experiences together have shaken my belief that the truth is ever known in any of these cases. I can explain a little bit about the work I'm doing right now, in that I had some experiences defending people who were charged with capital crimes. And in some of those instances, actually all of them, we were lucky enough that the death penalty wasn't imposed. And I use that word luck, and I'll explain that more a little bit later in my remarks. But there have been those unlucky few who have who are sitting now on death row waiting to be executed. And let me tell you that this process that I'm involved in right now is a re-examination of the trials, the criminal process, a re-examination of the evidence that was presented in a capital case. And the lawyers that I work with every day battle the passage of time in trying to bring the real truth of these cases to light. It's been decades since some of these events took place. There are people who were convicted of the death penalty in 1996 who are just now reaching their post-conviction processes. So what Kevin spoke to about that young man being exonerated years and years and decades after he was executed, those events are taking place now as we try to battle to bring the truth to light so many decades later. I can tell you from some of my personal experiences that in this post-conviction process, the system doesn't cooperate to correct past wrongs. Prosecutors do not want to participate in the unwinding of a process that they were part of. There is very little cooperation to get to the truth in lots of these cases. We battle every day to make sure that we have enough time to perform our investigations. And we battle every day with the fear that the truth about our clients will not be spoken, that they will not ever get the justice that their cases deserve. In my experiences, I have learned that the state of Kansas, as many resources that they have devoted to executing people, has never funded a criminal defense system that is adequate to protect a person from being wrongfully convicted. It has never provided the kinds of resources, the kinds of funding, the kinds of time, and the kinds of well-trained, well-honed defense attorneys to carry out this system that's been put in place. It's never been funded adequately, and it never will be funded adequately. The luck that comes to play, and which I referred to earlier, is a situation where you can have a crime in one part of the state of Kansas that was a result. The result was multiple people were killed, and no death penalty was sought in that case. Another part of the state, multiple people are killed, and the death penalty is sought. You can have cases where there was a sexually motivated homicide. In one part of the state, they don't seek the death penalty. Another part of the state, they do seek the death penalty. It's luck which cases are charged as a capital crime and which are not. And the clients that we have had the privilege of working for and against the system are those unlucky few where the death penalty was imposed. So I would say that my experiences have led to exactly what the rest of the panelists believe, and that is that our system isn't good enough to choose between those decisions of life and death. And as a side note, in recognition of all of the collateral damage that happens and spins out of this death penalty, I've talked to so many witnesses, so many jurors who have regrets about their participation in this process. There are jurors who have sat on death penalty cases who didn't understand their sole vote could be recognized as a vote against the death penalty, and the death penalty would not have been imposed. Jurors are not provided with the correct kinds of tools to understand their responsibility in this life or death decision. And they are living with the collateral damage that they'll have to suffer with over their lifetimes of regret and not acting and not speaking. So there are all kinds of people that are hurt by our process here in Kansas. And it's time to recognize that it's not worth the pain. It's not worth the money. It's not a solution to anything. So thank you.
Thank you, Julia. if anyone has any questions, you could start putting them in the chat. I've got a couple of them, but I have one I'd like to direct to Dalton, one which I myself have. And I think the rest of you may have some insight on this too, but I've been working for abolition of the death penalty, as some of you have, and I know people in our attendees have, for a long time. And we all, and I certainly have feelings of discouragement a lot. You say you were convinced by friends who worked on you over time. Do you have any advice to us on how we handle that discouragement when we're going to the legislature and talking to people who seem totally intransigent? What can we do to convince them?
Yeah, I think it's very tough. For me, people change people, facts don't change people, and people are very slow at moving a lot of the time. And so I think for me, it was somebody approaching with the gray side of it as well, and not being accusatory, not being not looking down on somebody when they have a different opinion, and willing to have a conversation and creating a space for a conversation. I think that's how we move on this issue, and how I've seen my generation in particular move on this issue. And for me, if somebody would have came in a hostile way and approached it aggressively, it would have probably shut down the conversation and shut down the ability to work together. And so I've worked with legislators and candidates that when I started having conversations with them, were very pro death penalty. And as we moved in this, they at least became apathetic, and apathetic is a win, and it's moving in the right direction. And so if we can get people slowly to move more and more towards abolition, then I think it's hopeful. I also think it's a new generation of young leaders that will also bridge on this. I have very few young conservative friends that support abolition, and none on the other side of the aisle, or that don't support abolition rather. And so I think it's a generational thing. And I also think we're moving in the right direction. It's just slower than I think a lot of us on the call would like. But I'm an example of somebody that changed their opinion on it. And I have plenty of friends that have done the same. And so don't give up hope, keep moving forward, and keep approaching the conversations with truth and grace.
Any of the other panelists have any suggestions or follow up on Dalton's comments? That's very helpful to me. Along some of the same political lines, we had a question of was directed to Mary regarding Colorado. Do you have a knowledge of how the process in Colorado managed to happen? Did the governor twist arms? Was it bipartisan? Do you know how it went? If you know,
I really don't know. I had just heard, actually back in 2013 when they suspended the death penalty at that point, I heard from the reporter in Colorado who told me about it. And as I was researching, because I couldn't remember what year that was, as I was researching to prepare for today, that's when I discovered that they had done away with the death penalty last year. So I'm sorry, I don't know what process they went through.
yeah, I followed it as it went through the legislature, and it seemed to me that it was a fairly typical process, but I don't remember it in detail. I just know that it got traction and people did the right things to get it passed. Largely, it's communication with legislators, which is what we're asking all of our people to do too. Let me address a quick question to Kevin. Maybe this will pick up some issues. Do you have any thoughts about how using art and your forte in your business can be used to further our cause?
Yeah, well, there's a recent film called Just Mercy that does a great job of showing kind of everything we're talking about this afternoon. I think that, I love, the fact that Mary was willing to talk today, because I think a big part of convincing people through art, and even in what you were talking about, Ron, in terms of like the legislature and so forth, is acknowledging the emotion about it. I mean, you've got to acknowledge the anger that comes from when you lose someone, you know. And again, I've lost friends. I've not lost a loved one, but I've lost friends that meant a lot to me who were murdered. And when I think about the person who took their life, I get very angry about that. And I would like to see them, you know, go through the same pain and suffering as a person that I loved and that I cared about. So I think when you talk about these issues with folks, I think you have to acknowledge that. I think you have to acknowledge the emotional part of it, because they get mad at you when you don't do that. I mean, I think they just shut you down, you know, in terms of like, you don't understand, you know, if you don't acknowledge that part of it, you know, and then you acknowledge that part of it, and then I think you move forward toward trying to push them toward a deeper, bigger understanding of how these things work. But I think you have to acknowledge. And so in movies, you have to, you know, if you're going to show someone go through what Mary went through, you're going to have to show them go through the whole kind of evolution from, it's like the stages of death, you know, it's like you got to go through all these stages to get to kind of where you're not, you know, obsessed with revenge anymore, you know? And that to me, I think is a big part of why people are for the death penalty. I think in the end, it ends up kind of being about revenge. I think it ends in Hollywood, we make a lot of movies about revenge. I try to stay away from those movies, you know? But that's a big part of it, is just straight out revenge. And you know, Americans love revenge. I mean, they do. I think you gotta admit that's a big part of kind of who we are. And Christian churches don't really talk against revenge very much. You know, there's a lot of times revenge is kind of embedded in a lot of the messages they put out. And so that's a big, I think that's a big part of when you go to a legislature, that's the thing they're not going to say to you out loud, but that's what it is.
Pastor
Yeah, I'd
Harder,
like
do you-
to, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on what Kevin was saying there, that, you know, those people who hold on to the desire for revenge are never going to, and I'm speaking, you know, the family members and friends, holding on to that desire for revenge is going to prevent them from ever reaching a place of peace. They have to, and moving on with their lives. So the murderer is still controlling their lives too. They didn't just take the life of the victim. If you're allowing that desire for revenge and the anger to control your life, then you're never going to get past it. You have to try to reach a place of letting go of the anger in order to reach a place of peace and move on with your life. So, and that's where I hope that I've done.
Anyone else have thoughts? Pastor Harder?
Yes, two things that I'd say that have been formative for me in terms of media, and that is Brian Stevenson's book, like you mentioned, Kevin, Just Mercy, the movie as well. And again, Steve Becker, I've been promoting him quite a bit here, but he and his daughter, Beth White, have a podcast called Cleared that are working on stories of working through exonerated cases. And Steve Bledsoe's, well, he's been the speaker here before, but the book Four Shots in Oski is a very interesting book, and it hits too close to home for me. I'm really curious, Kevin, sort of taken aback that that revenge, churches, I agree with the idea of revenge and American need for revenge, and it really is in the narrative of a lot of our movies, the idea of redemptive violence. I'm curious though, as a pastor who just quoted, the idea that only revenge belongs to God, not us. I'm curious, what sort of messages do you hear coming from the church that could help us to temper that and move us?
I think the folks that stressed the Old Testament, I think it's all kind of embedded in that. There's a lot of things that I think we hear in various ways, not just from the church, but from our movies, our literature, or just our common kind of discussions that we have, that is kind of an unspoken kind of understanding that we all kind of have, that we were kind of raised with and we kind of grew up with as a culture, that says, get those guys, get the guy that got you, get them. And we kind of celebrate that in various ways. And it's not a very popular message to come out and say, forgive that guy that just tried to destroy you. It's not what people want to hear, and when you watch a movie and at the end of the movie, if that you get the horrible bad guy, and the hero's got the horrible bad guy, and he's got him, and he's got the gun and the whole bit, and he lets him go, or he doesn't kill him, we tend to be a little disappointed, and the audience isn't as satisfied, and I think when you see that choice in movies are about satisfying the audience. If the audience didn't want it, Hollywood's not going to do it. Hollywood just wants to make money. It doesn't want to do anything else. So if the audience wanted the bad guy to go to prison and not be executed, they would be ending movies like that. I mean, every young people like right now love Quentin Tarantino. His movies are all about revenge. They're all about revenge. And the problem with revenge movies is that it's the same problem that we have in American life. It's a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot more it's the things that you said, Pastor. It's the things that Mary says, the things that Julia said, things that Dalton said. It's a lot more complicated. And the more things become complicated, the more we kind of want easy answers. And we just want to take the easy kind of Hollywood kind of ending that, just satisfies the audience but we don't share any truth at all.
One of the perhaps examples of being hard to do the right thing is maybe the Strickland case over in Kansas City that's going in the Kansas City or in Missouri. One of our participants has asked if the panel might want to comment on that. Julia, does that say something about our system? I mean, we've got a prosecutor who wants to exonerate someone she believes is innocent, supported by other prosecutors around the state, but opposed by many prosecutors. Why is that happening?
Well, it really doesn't make much sense at all, does it? I guess from my perspective on Mr. Strickland's situation, again, it's the system itself that refuses to acknowledge that it's comprised of human beings that are infallible, make mistakes. None of us have lived a life mistake-free, and so to impose a death penalty on an imperfect system necessarily means there are going to be mistakes. There are going to be innocent people who are put to death. But as far as the death penalty itself, you know, the system is so certain of who is guilty and who is not, that it just does not allow for things to be unwound without the participation of everybody in the system. And there are cases where the truly innocent, wrongfully convicted person is getting a lot of attention. But in my view, we should focus more on a system that allows that to happen. How can we trust it to execute someone? It makes no sense to me. And we're all equally guilty, so to speak, in participating in various ways in the system that created this death penalty.
If I could just add too, I think that it's about politics. You know, it's just about politics. And I think, you know, he believes his constituency, the governor believes that his supporters don't want to release a black man that, you know, that could be innocent. And I think he knows he doesn't get anything for that. I don't think he doesn't get anything for that. And, you know, Missouri is also a state where when you've been in prison for 20 years and they find out you're innocent, you don't get any reparations for that. You know, Missouri's a state that likes to be hard on people. And so, you know, there's this Miracle of Innocence project that's in Missouri that it tries to raise funds to help all the innocent people that are in prison, that when they get out, if you're in one of those states that won't give you any money for all the time they kept you in jail for a crime you didn't commit, you know, you know, when, you know, as you know, folks that are part of that program will tell you, when you get out of prison and you've committed a crime, there are things for you to serve you to re-enter society. When you leave from a state that has nothing for you, and you didn't commit a crime, and they release you, and you're released, like in Missouri, you're released with nothing. There's no programs for you. There's nothing for you. And so it lets you know, it's that thing that Julia is talking about. There's no benefit. The system gives you no benefit in terms of acknowledging someone who's you know, has been in prison for a crime that they didn't commit, or is, you know, like with the Strickland case, has, you know, literally, you know, been on the death penalty for a crime they did not commit.
Does anyone here have any other questions they would like the panel to follow up on?
Could I ask a question?
Certainly.
I often hear the argument or the point in a discussion that the death penalty is actually useful, at least the existence of the death penalty is useful as leverage for garnering a plea or something like that. How would I engage a point like that?
Julia?
Well, I guess my response to that would be initially, the death penalty is proven time and time again across the nation. It's not a deterrent in any way to crime. It doesn't reduce the number of homicides in any given case. It does not effectively reduce homicide or murder. But as far as the value in plea negotiations, many, the vast majority, 95 to 98% of all criminal matters brought into the system are negotiated with pleas. The existence of the death penalty has absolutely no effect on 99% of those cases. So just as a matter of logic, that really doesn't make sense. There have been proposals to do away with the death penalty and instead substitute a life without parole option. And, you know, to me, it would seem to an average criminal defense attorney that would give you the same options for plea negotiations that having a death penalty would.
The other issue is a cost issue. The Kansas Judicial Council has done a study that indicates that even death penalty cases that have pled cost multiples more than those who are not pled. And they say you save money. Well, you charge the death penalty, you've already spent money. And the Kansas Judicial Council study has proven that. So there's a financial issue in there that's also false. They say they save time and money. No time and money is saved, or very little is saved, if any. I can say after 40 years as a criminal defense lawyer myself, I don't know if I can say a single time somebody has pled because the threat of the bigger crime is the only reason. There's always many more. It's far more complex than that, as this panel has said several times. It's never boiled down to one question. So I would say it's patently false. Julia, would you agree with that little?
Oh, for sure, Ron. Yes, I think that argument is a deflection from the real issue surrounding the death penalty. There were plea agreements reached before Kansas reenacted the death penalty, and I can't imagine that actually having that is making any difference.
Do we have any other questions or concerns? I think this panel has addressed a good number of questions that I've had, and hopefully that our participants have had. And if we have no other issues to address, we can turn the matter back over to Donna. And with our greatest thanks to the panelists, the 5 of you have given us great hope. Thank you.
Let's do our own individual applause, everybody who's participating, even though you can't hear it. So thank you to each of you. To Mary, sharing your story about your loss, a loss which is replicated by far too many people, and the journeys that you are thrust into living, whether with no choice about it. Dalton, thank you for your journey, for sharing the story of your own coming to a change of heart, for giving us some insights on how to walk with our own legislators who may or may not be with us, and to do so perhaps more effectively. And Kevin, reminding us about the power of story and dealing with the emotions. And many times that emotion is like the elephant in the room that makes it hard to have the progress on things. So thank you for that. And Pastor Harder, for your words on we aren't good enough, and the many faith and scriptural sources that we can look at as we grapple with this issue. Thank you. And Julia, thank you for reminding us of the many ways that our system fails to live up to its promise, and reminding us that capital punishment isn't just a theory, but it's actually a real live process that can play out very badly and can really harm people in the process as well. There was one question which had been raised in the chat, which was about the status of our legislative bill. House Bill 2300 was introduced in the Kansas House earlier this year with 34 sponsors, the most ever. We had 22 Democrats and 12 Republicans. It was referred to committee. There was no committee hearing this year, so we will continue to work in dialogue with legislators. And frankly, next year being an election year, we also have to work very hard at candidate education, because that is super important, because when candidates run for the legislature, they do not know everything about every topic. They may know what their professional career has them exposed to, or other things that they have had an interest in, but many of them know about this much on the death penalty when they get to the legislature. So thank you again, all of you, for your remarks, and thank you to our attendees for being here today. Before we close, I just want to invite everyone who has participated today to think about how you might commit to action on the question of the death penalty. And there's many ways that you can do that. Number one, share something today that you heard that moved your heart with a family member or friend. Just let them know, have that conversation, make a difference there. You never know what you might spark, as in the case of Dalton. You might spark someone else thinking about it more deeply. Secondly, if you're not already a member of the coalition, we invite you to join us. There is no membership fee. You can go to our website, click on the button or click on the language that says join KCADP, and it's a very easy process. And we will send you our monthly newsletter and occasional alerts about special actions that are needed. And if you're already a member, it's a great time to invite a family member or friend. The third way you can commit to action is if you're on Facebook, you can follow our page and share our posts with the folks who follow your page. It's another way of getting the stories out, because often we will post things that are specific stories that help take and show the persons and the issues behind the people, as opposed to just the facts of it. Number four, visit our website. There are some great resources there. There is there's a tab called Voices, which gives you an opportunity to read the reflections of Kansas murder victim family members. Great to have and to share, a given person's story with a legislator or someone that you know who's grappling with the issue. There's reflections from Kansas Connected exonerees as well. And there's also an opportunity to donate there. Now, for those of you who are like, got all those done, you can contact your legislator and engage in that dialogue about the death penalty. May not be easy, but keep the dialogues going, because as Ron and Treese, Sister Treese Banger, who's on our board, and I can tell you, having those conversations and just ongoing dialogues with legislators can make a difference and can change hearts. And so even if your own legislator is someone who is not currently supportive of abolition, engage in that dialogue. If you want to learn more about how to do it, get in touch with me through the coalition email, and I'll be glad to visit with you some more about that. Finally, the opportunity to host a presentation for your faith community, your civic group, a college class, a club that you belong to. We have a variety of people who are speakers, and we also know other folks who we can connect you to who can help explore this topic for your colleagues in your faith community, your club, your organization, whatever the case might be. In 1907, Kansas abolished the death penalty. Way back in the early years, when we were a lot less advanced in terms of what we had for penal system and all that sort of stuff. It was subsequently reinstated, then ended in 1972 with the US Supreme Court decision, and reinstated in 1994. It has been 56 years since we have executed anyone. But there is much work to be done, because as Julia and many other attorneys will tell you, cases continue to be filed. Jurors continue to be put through this process, this traumatizing process. Murder victim families are put through this process. And we do have people sentenced to death in the state of Kansas. Abolition can and will end when we build enough support to bring about the change in our political leaders. Our abolition bills show that diversity of support, because if you look at the list of who's on there as sponsors, they extend across the political spectrum. And our panel today shows the diversity of support for abolition. And so we encourage you to think about what you can do, each of us contributing what we can to help make Kansas a death penalty free state. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the board committee who worked on this, to Al who worked behind the scenes on the technical stuff, to Ron for his moderation of the panel, our panelists. Thank you, everyone. And keep up the good work, and let's get this thing abolished. Thank you.